everyone, and welcome once again to another episode of Tata Katha, where we are reviewing this wonderful book, Tata Stories 40 Timeless Tales to Inspire You, written by the dynamic and distinguished Mr. Harish Bhat, brand custodian Tata Sons. Good afternoon, Mr. Bhat. It's a pleasure having you again.
Good afternoon, Girish, and people coming back to the next episode of Tata Kathas. Thank you so much for hosting me here.
It's a pleasure, sir. And today we will be discussing about the pioneering spirit of Tata Group, which I feel has been extremely well covered by 4 stories in your book, which is the first one of which is the dam at Walwan. The second is Tata Indica, India's own car. The third is about the astronaut and the pioneer. And the last one is about the slimmest watch in the universe. Now, beginning with the story of the dam at Walwan, one thing which struck me, sir, when I was going through the story was that the scale at which it was conceived and the foreign collaboration that was envisaged. Now, these two traits, the scale as well as bringing in a foreign collaborator right in the beginning of a journey, as well as at the beginning of India's economic independence and political independence, have been two traits that have been at the heart of most of the initiatives of the Tata Group. So therefore, sir, first do tell us about the story of the dam at Walwan, as well as about these two traits that have stood the Tata Group as well as India in good stead over the past few years.
So, Girish, the first time I saw the dam at Walwan was when my wife and I had gone to Walwan for a brief holiday. And the scale of the dam is amazing. And then I asked myself, you can sit there, it sits on the Indrayani River. You see the shimmering lake in front of you and this huge dam all the way. In fact, if you're driving from Bombay to Pune, you can see it from the expressway as well, some parts of the dam. And then I asked myself, where did this come from? How did this happen? No, where the story of the Walwan Dam really begins is Jamshedji Tata had noted the heavy monsoon rains in the Western Ghats. And he had remarked, why is all this water from the Western Ghats wasted? We should harness it to produce hydroelectric power and clean power for the city of Mumbai. So his motivation was to give clean power to the city of Mumbai. Where until then textile mills were using a lot of coal, there was soot within the mills and maybe unhealthy working environments as well. You're right, the Walwan Dam is indeed a commendable engineering feat. We must remember that it came up in 1915, more than 100 years ago. And more than 100 years ago, look at the dimensions of the dam, 86.5 feet in height. 4,449 feet in length. The dam volume was 64 lakh cubic feet. And it was only a little smaller than the original legendary dam on the Nile River, which many people have heard of, the Aswan Dam. Most people thought a dam at that scale was inconceivable in India. But the Tatas were determined to forge ahead. So this thought came from Jamshedji Tata. But unfortunately, Jamshedji Tata passed away before the realization of this dam in 1904. And it was his son, Sir Dorabji Tata, who took on this responsibility with great energy and enthusiasm and made the dam possible. If you go there and observe the dam, there are giant pipes which have been laid all the way. And these pipes are around 7 feet in diameter. They carry the water all the way from these dams to the foothills of the Western Ghats. It's a steep fall of about 1,700 feet to the power station at Khopoli. That's the way these dams work. And therefore, to do something like this, he ensured that he got the best technologists from the world. And there were actually 3 Western engineers who were involved with the construction of this dam. R.P. Joyner, Alfred Dickinson, and H.P. Gibbs. And Sir Dorabji Tata actually paid tribute to them during the inaugural function. This dam was such a magnificent edifice. Nothing of this magnitude had been attempted in the past in India. It was by any standards pioneering work and the first major hydroelectric project in our country. And Lord Willingdon, the governor of Mumbai, actually inaugurated this by switching on the power at the power station in Parel in Mumbai, which is very close to where I live today. And this is what he said. He addressed Dorabji Tata and he said, it must be a source of great pride and satisfaction to you, Mr. Chairman, and to your brother, that to find that today you have established in India another magnificent and permanent memorial to your father's great services to this country. And earlier, when the foundation stone was laid, Lord Sydenham had said it symbolizes the confidence of Indians in themselves, their willingness to be associated with a project of this magnitude that is somewhat unfamiliar in the country. So that is the story of the Walwhan Dam, something which had never been attempted before. Many of the stories today, when you hear later stories like the Titan Edge, you will again see it has never been attempted in India before it happened. And that is why it represents the spirit of pioneering. Because what is pioneering? Pioneering is our capacity to go where no one has gone before. And the Walwhan Dam was clearly an example of the pioneering spirit that the Tata Group brings. The second angle, Girish, that you referred to was this pioneering spirit doesn't exist for itself. It exists for a greater good. And with the Tata Group, my own historical research has shown that in most cases, that greater good was nation building. And looking at how you could contribute to nation building, in this case, nation building took the form of clean energy to the commercial capital of India, Mumbai city. And until today, Tata Power continues to supply, power to virtually half the city of Mumbai. So that's I think very briefly the story of the Walwhan Dam.
Right, sir. Thank you for that. I think one of the other things which perhaps has got unrecorded is the ability of the Tatas to find funding for these large projects, which again is a very strong reflection of the credibility and credentials that the group enjoys in the eyes of the bankers and funders. They know that the money that they are putting in will go to the cause for which it has been taken. They know that the project will be executed within the time frame that has been committed, and they know that the returns that have been envisaged are fair and modest and honest.
So you're right, Girish, but it was not easy to raise funds at that time for a dam of this magnitude. If you go back in the history of this dam, you will see that Sir Harish Bhat traveled across the country. He met the rulers of Indian states, the Maharajas of that time, and he persuaded each of these Maharajas to subscribe to the shares of this company, which put up this dam. So it did not happen by itself. There's a lot of effort involved in getting people to subscribe to a project like this. Much like earlier for Tata Steel, there was an equivalent effort in raising funds for Tata Steel when it had been founded. So you're right, raising resources is very, very important in a large pioneering venture like this. But I think even at that time, so Darabji Tata and the leadership of the Tata Group invested a lot of effort in making it happen.
Which speaks volumes about the will and conviction, sir, at the leadership level. A story and a spirit which was again reflected in the creation of Tata Indica, which is India's first car, and on which you also have a story in your book, sir. Now, I personally can never forget the excitement around Tata Indica. I was a management trainee in Hyderabad, and that is the time the Tata Indica was being spoken about. And when the car first came, there were these advertisements in the papers and on hoardings all over Hyderabad, which spoke of more car per car, which was a reflection on the space that it had. It also spoke about the running cost of, I think, 1 rupee per kilometer, which was a take on the diesel variant which was launched. And it also had a grab hook at the back of the bumper, which conveyed the strength that it had. It could, kind of tag along any other vehicle or any other car. I had gone to one of the Concord showrooms, which is a Tata-owned showroom, to see the car. And I was visibly, there was a lot of excitement around and a lot of rush for people to at least, to get to sit on the driver's seat and see all the functions, see the steering, and, play around with the knobs and buttons. And when it came on the roads, it created a tremendous impression. And there were stories, of course, one read in the newspapers on the great passion and determination which Mr. Tata had to launch a car which was made in India. One of the things which I did not know, which I came to know on reading your book, was that the project was started off at 1/5 the cost by moving a car manufacturing plant from Australia into India, which again, like I had mentioned earlier, is a very strong reflection on the ability of the Tatas to, tie up these foreign institutional arrangements to start projects in India. And therefore, sir, I'll be delighted if you could share with us the story of Tata Indica.
So Girish, the Tata Indica is yet another fascinating story from the archives of the Tata Group. But let me start with a personal anecdote. I was a proud user of a silver grey Tata Indica during my early days in Tata Tea when I was a marketing manager there. So my house was in Jayanagar in Bangalore, and every day I had to travel to Yashwadpur, which was the location of the Tata Tea manufacturing plant and marketing office. I used to feel very proud of my Indica, and many people used to look at it on the road as well. But let me tell you, the 4 years that I used that Indica for, I don't think it gave me a single problem. It traveled the roads beautifully, and I felt very safe and secure in the car, as much as I felt very proud of the design of the car, which was a revolutionary design at that point in time. But just like the dam at Walwal, or just like Tata Steel or the other stories you will hear later in this episode, Tata Indica was pioneering because it was India's first indigenous car, made virtually completely of indigenous components. Now, the story started in 1995 when Mr. Ratan Tata expressed his ambitions to create an Indian car, an indigenous Indian car for the nation. And there were a lot of naysayers at that stage who refused to believe in an Indian car because they thought car manufacturing requires a lot of technology. And at that time, you had Maruti Suzuki, which was assembling Japanese cars in Gurgaon, and you had I think Hyundai, which was assembling Korean cars in Chennai. But none of them were truly Indian cars at that stage. Nonetheless, Mr. Tata was determined to go ahead, and he forged ahead with the Indica project. Even the name of the project, Indica, I think spells pride in the nation. It is a name derived from India. And if you go back into history, that's the name of the book, I think, which was written by the Greek person Megasthenes on India itself, Indica. What happened thereafter was interesting. He spelt out a vision to people within Tata Motors, or Telco, as the company was called at that time. And he said, we need to have a car with the size of an Ambassador, the price of a Maruti 800, and the sleekness or design of a Zen. So that was a very simple expression of what the car should be like. And it was a courageous decision to go ahead because there had not been an indigenous car made in India earlier. But if the Indica had to be world class, then its design had to be comparable with the best. So the Engineering Research Center at Tata Motors, Pune, collaborated with the Turin-based design house Idea to produce the design for this car. Very futuristic and very sleek. I'm told when the design was unveiled, the reactions it elicited were euphoric. Everyone agreed it was clearly ahead of its time. I've spoken to one of the people in the ERC of Tata Motors in Pune who was involved with the car at that stage. And he said when he took out the test version of the car for a drive on Pune, he had people actually come and touch the car, and many people made him stop the car, saying, I want to look at it and touch it because it looks clearly ahead of its time and is futuristic. So that was the design of the car. But you're right. It was a very expensive project because a car manufacturing facility, if it's put up firsthand, I'm told, I'm not a car manufacturing expert, I'm told it could have cost more than $2 billion. And that was a very large cost for Telco at that point to undertake. But once again, in the spirit of a pioneer, Mr. Ratan Tata and his team did not give up. They went around the world to understand how could they get a car plant at an affordable price for Tata Motors in India. And they took a road less traveled, like all pioneers do. So when they went around the world, they found a disused Nissan plant in Australia, which was not being used. And they were able to buy that disused Nissan plant, all the plant and machinery, for about 1/5 the cost of a new plant. And then what happened was fascinating. They disassembled the plant there brick by brick, brought it all the way to Pune, and installed it at the Tata Motors plant in. That is the story of how the Tata Motors manufacturing plant was set up. I've been to the Tata Motors plant in Pune and I've interviewed some of the operators who assembled the first Indica car. Even today, Girish, there are tears in their eyes, but they are tears of pride when they say we assembled India's first car. And they say it took them 8 days to assemble the first car. Now you will find a car coming out of the Tata Motors Pune plant every 54 seconds. So that's the road that this car has traveled over the. But the Tata Indica story is also a story of determination, Girish, because it was launched in 1998. It ran into some initial quality issues. Even today, managers of Tata Motors squirm when we talk about those issues. But once again, Mr. Ratan Tata and his team addressed those upfront. They met consumers, they met distributors, they understood the root cause of those issues, they were fixed, and Tata Indica was relaunched as the Tata Indica V2 by 2001, with the punchline that you referred to earlier, even more car per car. It was a brilliant car, and it became the fastest selling car in Indian history when it completed the sale of 1 lakh cars in less than 18 months. And BBC Wheels actually declared Indica the best car in the 3 lakh to 5 lakh category in that particular year. So that's the story of the Indica. But what made Mr. Ratan Tata take up this challenge of making India's own car? And I'm quoting from his own words from an interview. He said, I had a strong conviction, he says, that our engineers who could put a rocket into space could produce our own car. And when we took up the challenge, we went out and got expertise wherever it was necessary. Everything we had in it was ours. So to me, the Indica was a great feeling of national achievement. So, apart from everything else that it has accomplished, just like the dam at Walwal, or just like Tata Steel, or just like the other stories you'll hear on this episode like Titan Edge, there was a feeling of great national achievement that we had done something which had never been attempted in the country before. Today, of course, Tata Motors produces such beautiful cars. If you have seen the Tata Nexon, the Tata Nexon EV, you have seen the Tata Harrier, you have seen the latest version of the Tata Safari. So the beautiful cars which have come out of the Tata Motors stable since then, but the foundation was established by the Tata Indica more than 20 years ago now.
Indeed, sir. I also incidentally have my own Tata Indica story to tell you. So what had happened is that way back in 2002, I was posted from Indonesia back into India with my company, Olam, at that point of time. And I was there to set up some factories, and I was given the option of buying either a Honda City or any other car, according to my grade. So I went to Visakhapatnam, and I went straight to the Tata showroom. I said, first of all, I would like to have a look at the Indica because I've heard of the V2 and I would have like to take it out for a test drive. So I took it for a test drive and I gave up the much acclaimed Honda City to buy a Tata Indica. And I used it for my own official and personal use. Not only that, when my managers came from Singapore to visit me in Visakhapatnam, and these were all Indians but settled in Singapore, they knew that I have got an Indica, and everyone said that they would like to sit and drive the Indica. And therefore, we drove all the way from Visakhapatnam to Tuni and all the areas around that, which were where our business was. So it has that, there was a tremendous amount of pride and a tremendous amount of nationalistic pride to have a look at the vehicle, to own a vehicle and to drive it. And the second story, sir, which I can never forget, is the commitment which Tata Motors made and which Mr. Ratan Tata made for Tata Nano, which again is a story in itself. I remember the launch of the event wherein he said that while as the costs have gone up in the last 2 years, and they also have had to relocate the factory from Bengal into Gujarat. But I remember his words, a promise is a promise is a promise, and that the car will come to you at an X factory price of 1 lakh rupees. So that, I think, was another big feather on the cap of Tata Motors, which then was Telco and is now, of course, Tata Motors. And that brings me, sir, to the third story, which you have written in your book, which is on the Astronaut and the Pioneer. Now, I don't think that there is a better way to understand the tremendous respect that Indians have for Tata Group and the place that it occupies in our hearts and minds than to look at the story of Kalpana Chawla, who went into space with a photograph of J.R.D. Tata and his aircraft. And after the tragedy in which Kalpana Chawla passed away, Kalpana Chawla's family sent a letter to Mr. Ratan Tata. I would request Mr. Bhat to tell us about that entire incident and about the letter which the family had written to Mr. Ratan Tata.
This is a very the story of the astronaut and the pioneer of J.R.D. Tata and Kalpana Chawla is a very inspiring story. To tell you the truth, when I was writing the story in the book Tata Stories, at the end of writing the story, I almost wept. I had tears in my eyes, and I'll tell you why as we go by. Now, what happened was, Kalpana Chawla, of course, is a national hero in India. She's the first woman of Indian origin to go into space. And like you mentioned, very unfortunately, at the young age of 40 years, she lost her life in the Space Shuttle Columbia disaster. She's not just a national icon. You should know that NASA has dedicated a supercomputer to her memory. You should know that, an asteroid has been named after her. So, that's the power of imagination that her name has in our minds until today. Now, after she passed away, as you rightly said, a letter from her parents reached Mr. Ratan Tata. And that letter had some memorabilia of Kalpana Chawla. It had a crew autographed group picture of the space shuttle mission crew. It had a pair of medallions commemorating her 2 space journeys. But very interestingly, it had an old black and white photograph. So it's there in a complete frame. I happened to see it when I went to the Tata Central Archives, where it is kept even till today. And I didn't know the story of this at that stage. So I asked our chief archivist there, Mr. Narla, can you send me some documents which tell me the story of what happened? And here is the story of what happened. Why this old black and white photograph? It happens that this old black and white photograph of J.R.D. Tata on his first ever flight, first ever Indian commercial flight, which happened in 1932, was carried very fondly by Kalpana Chawla on her first space journey. And why would she do that? Why would she take a black and white photograph of the chairman of the Tata Group with her when she goes into space? The story is very interesting. In October 1932, J.R.D. Tata piloted the first ever Indian commercial flight. That's a story which is perhaps very well known, from Karachi to Ahmedabad to Mumbai. It was the 15th of October 1932. He was a young man at that stage, in his late 20s, early 30s. But 50 years later, in 1982, they decided to reenact that first flight. Now remember, 50 years later, in 1982, J.R.D. Tata was 78 years of age. 78 years of age. He had suffered a mild heart attack a few weeks before. But he stubbornly insisted that he would fly the 50th anniversary flight at the age of 78. I am told that even the board of directors was reluctant. But J.R.D. Tata just insisted. Finally, I am told his consulting physician and cardiologist decided to permit him to fly because the emotional strain of abandoning the flight would be much more than any physical strain of flying. So J.R.D. Tata took to the skies. 78 years of age, the patriarch of the Tata Group, a man who had done the best for the nation through his lifetime. Captain Vishwanath was his co-pilot. The flight took the same route, Karachi to Ahmedabad, and from Ahmedabad to Mumbai, I think J.R.D. Tata flew the flight single-handed. I'm told when he approached the Juhu aerodrome in Mumbai, which is where the 1932 flight had also landed, 2 Air Force helicopters escorted him to the Juhu aerodrome, and he landed sharp at 4 p.m. because he believed in that kind of punctuality. He actually had to circle the airport once or twice so that he could land sharply at 4 p.m. When he landed, There was clearly a lot of curiosity and interest. Why has this man at the age of 78 decided to reenact this flight? So J.R.D. Tata addressed that in what he told the gathering. And I'm reading this out from my book, Tata Stories. This is what he said. He said, this flight of mine today was intended to inspire a little hope and enthusiasm in the younger people of our country, that despite all the difficulties, all the frustrations, there is a joy in having done something as well as you could and better than others thought you could. Look at those words. There is a joy in doing something as well as you could and better than others thought you could. So he was doing this to inspire the young people of our country. And one young person watching him in 1982 was Kalpana Chawla. She heard of this flight and she was inspired by this flight. She goes on to say, what J.R.D. Tata had done during those years was very intriguing and definitely captivated my imagination. So that's what happened. J.R.D. Tata captivated the imagination of Kalpana Chawla, and she decided to go to the United States of America and pursue her higher education in aeronautics. And after having pursued her higher education in aeronautics, she joined NASA. And the rest of the story is very well known to us, that she became the first woman of Indian origin to go into space. Because J.R.D. Tata was her inspiration, she carried this old black and white photograph of J.R.D. Tata's first commercial flight in India, dating back to 1932, all the way into space. I can imagine how emotional she was about that photograph, to carry it with her all the way into space at that time. But you know, the lesson, Girish, for me from this story, which goes beyond J.R.D. Tata and Kalpana Chawla, is that when you do something inspiring, it's not just for yourself. It's not just for your family or the people around you. When you do something inspiring and pioneering, like J.R.D. Tata did in 1982, it touches the lives and the imagination of millions of people. And it sparks in their mind dreams and desires of what they want to do. That's the story here. You know, what will Kalpana Chawla and J.R.D. Tata inspire each of us to do today? What will we, now or in the future, inspire others to do for the greater good of our nation and humanity? That's the story, Girish, of Kalpana Chawla and J.R.D. Tata. And it's a fascinating story. It makes me proud, but it also makes me cry. So is it a story of pioneering? Is it a story of inspiration? Is it a story of nation building? Perhaps it lies within all these spheres.